The sun gleamed off the polished deck of the Sea Freedom as it gently rocked in its slip at Harbor Point Marina. The yacht, an impressive 75-foot vessel with sleek lines and teak accents, represented years of hard work and determination for its owner, Andre Taylor. At 42 years old, Andre had built his fortune from scratch, transforming a small tech startup into a multi-million-dollar security software company that protected data for clients around the world. Today was meant to be a day of relaxation. Andre had invited a few close friends, his college roommate Jackson, who now ran a nonprofit, and Tiana, his company's brilliant lead developer, to enjoy the perfect summer weather out on the water. They had spent the morning sailing along the coast and had returned to the marina for a late lunch on the deck. "I still can't believe you actually bought this thing," Jackson laughed, sinking into one of the plush deck chairs and accepting a glass of lemonade from Andre. "Remember when we used to drive by marinas in college, and you would point at boats like this?" Andre smiled, leaning against the railing. "Dreams have to start somewhere," he said, looking out over the water. The marina bustled with weekend activity, families preparing their boats for afternoon outings, dock attendants hurrying back and forth, and the occasional tour group admiring the collection of luxury vessels. Tiana emerged from below deck with a tray of sandwiches she had prepared in the galley. "Food's ready. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us going until dinner." The three friends settled into comfortable conversation, reminiscing about old times and discussing plans for an upcoming charity event Andre's company was sponsoring. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of salt water and sunscreen across the deck, and for a moment, life felt perfectly balanced. That balance shattered when a sharp voice cut through their laughter. "Excuse me, what do you people think you're doing?" Andre turned to see a woman standing on the dock beside his yacht. She appeared to be in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and a tennis outfit that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. Her face was contorted with what could only be described as indignation, her manicured fingers clutching an expensive handbag. "Hello there," Andre called back pleasantly, assuming she might be lost or looking for another boat. "Can I help you with something?" The woman's posture stiffened. "Yes, you can help by explaining why you're on this yacht. Are you the cleaning crew? Because the owners wouldn't appreciate strangers lounging around drinking their alcohol." A heavy silence fell over the deck. Jackson straightened in his chair, and Tiana set down her glass with a careful, deliberate motion. Andre's expression remained neutral, though a muscle ticked in his jaw. "There must be some confusion," he replied, his voice still steady and polite. "I'm Andre Taylor. This is my yacht." The woman let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." She glanced around the marina as if looking for someone who might support her. "I know all the boat owners in this marina, and the people who own this particular vessel are not—" She paused, her gaze sweeping over Andre's dark skin. "They don't look like you." Jackson started to rise from his chair, but Andre subtly motioned for him to stay seated. This wasn't the first time he'd faced this kind of situation, and it probably wouldn't be the last. "Ma'am, I've owned the Sea Freedom for 3 years now. I'm a member of this marina's executive committee. Perhaps you're thinking of the previous owners? The Hendersons sold it to me in 2022. The woman's eyes narrowed. "A likely story? Look, I'm friends with the head of security here, and I don't appreciate people lying to my face. This slip costs $30,000 a year, and this yacht is worth at least $3 million. I think I'd know if someone like you owned it." Tiana coughed, nearly choking on her drink. "Someone like him?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. The woman ignored her, keeping her attention fixed on Andre. "I'm going to ask you once more to leave before I call security. The real owners could press charges for trespassing." Andre reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I understand your concern for the marina's security," he said, his tone still remarkably composed despite the growing tension. "But I think we should clear this up properly. Would you like to see my ownership documents? I keep digital copies on my phone." "I don't need to see your fake documents," the woman snapped, pulling out her own phone. "I'm calling Dave right now. He's head of security, and he'll sort this out." As she dialed, a small crowd began to gather on nearby docks. Weekend sailors and families paused their activities, drawn by the commotion. Andre noticed a couple taking out their phones, likely recording the interaction. "Dave?" "Yes, it's Elizabeth." I'm at slip 47 and there are people who don't belong here on the Hendersons' yacht. She paused, listening. No, they're claiming they own it, but we both know that's not true. Another pause. Yes, 3 of them. They look like they just walked in off the street. Andre exchanged glances with his friends. Jackson looked furious while Tiana seemed caught between anger and disbelief. It's fine, Andre said quietly to them. Let's just let this play out. As the woman, Elizabeth, continued her phone conversation, Andre turned to Tiana. Would you mind getting the paperwork from my office below? The blue folder in the desk drawer. Tiana nodded and disappeared below deck. Elizabeth ended her call with a triumphant smile. Security will be here in 5 minutes. I suggest you gather your things and leave now to avoid embarrassment. We'll wait, Andre replied simply, leaning back against the railing. This is unbelievable, Jackson muttered, shaking his head. In 2025 we're still dealing with this? Elizabeth crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently on the dock. The growing audience of onlookers created an uncomfortable fishbowl effect. Some people were whispering to each other, while others stared openly at the unfolding drama. A young couple on a neighboring boat caught Andre's eye and offered sympathetic smiles. The man gave a small thumbs up of support, which Andre acknowledged with a slight nod. Tiana returned with a blue folder and handed it to Andre, who took out several documents and held them ready. You know, Andre said conversationally, I remember when I first joined this marina. There were quite a few people who assumed I was part of the staff. One gentleman asked me to fill his gas tank, another asked if I could help with his bags. I always wondered what it was about me that made people think I worked here. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. The funny thing is, Andre continued, I never considered leaving. This is one of the best marinas on the coast, and I figured people would eventually get used to seeing me around. He gestured to the Sea Freedom and this yacht. I saw it 3 years ago and knew it was exactly what I wanted. The previous owners were lovely people who didn't care about anything except whether my check would clear. The sound of approaching footsteps on the dock announced the arrival of security. A tall man in a marina uniform approached, looking slightly winded. Elizabeth, what seems to be the problem? He asked, glancing between her and the people on the yacht. Elizabeth pointed at Andre and his friends. These people are trespassing on the Hendersons' boat. Dave, I caught them lounging around like they own the place. Dave looked at the yacht, then at Andre, and his expression immediately changed from concern to recognition. Mr. Taylor, he said with a nod. Is everything all right, sir? Elizabeth's mouth fell open. You know him? Dave turned to her with a confused expression. Of course I know Mr. Taylor. He's owned this slip for years now. He looked back at Andre apologetically. I'm sorry about this, sir. Elizabeth called about trespassers, but I didn't realize she was talking about you and your guests. Andre smiled slightly. No problem, Dave, just a misunderstanding. Elizabeth's face flushed red. But the Hendersons sold their yacht to Mr. Taylor back in 2022. Dave finished for her. Mr. Taylor is one of our most valued members. He sits on the marina's board and sponsors our youth sailing program. The crowd that had gathered was now watching Elizabeth, whose righteous indignation had crumbled into visible embarrassment. Some people were still recording with their phones, and Andre knew that within hours, this incident would likely be circulating on social media. Elizabeth opened and closed her mouth several times before finding her voice. I was just trying to look out for the marina's security, she managed weakly. Dave looked uncomfortable. Well, everything's fine here. Mr. Taylor, is there anything else you need? Andre considered the woman who was now staring at her expensive shoes. The easy thing would be to let her slink away in shame, to accept the apologies and move on. But something told him there was a better way to handle this, a way that might actually make a difference. Actually, Andre said, making a decision that would surprise everyone present, I was just about to offer our visitor a drink. Would you like to come aboard, Elizabeth? I think we got off on the wrong foot. Elizabeth stood frozen on the dock, her face cycling through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, embarrassment, and confusion. The crowd that had gathered was now watching her with judgmental eyes, their phones still recording what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. Come aboard? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Dave, the security officer, looked just as surprised as Elizabeth. He glanced at Andre, clearly trying to read his intentions. You're sure about this, Mr. Taylor? Dave asked quietly. Andre nodded. Completely sure. Sometimes the best way through a misunderstanding is conversation. He turned back to Elizabeth. The choice is yours, of course. No pressure. Jackson and Tiana exchanged bewildered looks. This wasn't the response either of them had expected. Jackson leaned forward in his chair. Andre, can I have a word? He asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. In a minute, Andre replied, his eyes still on Elizabeth, who seemed to be having an internal debate. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Elizabeth glanced around at the onlookers. The judgment in their eyes was palpable. Walking away now would only cement her as the villain in a story that was already spreading through the marina, like wildfire. Several people had their phones out, no doubt sharing what they'd witnessed on social media. I suppose a brief conversation couldn't hurt, she finally said, though her body language suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Andre extended his hand to help her onto the yacht, a gesture of courtesy that seemed to confuse Elizabeth even more. She hesitated, then took his hand and stepped carefully aboard, her tennis shoes landing on the polished deck with a soft thud. Dave, we're good here, Andre called to the security officer. Thanks for coming by. Dave nodded, though he still looked uncertain. I'll be around if you need anything, he said, giving Elizabeth a pointed look before walking away. The crowd began to disperse, though several people lingered, clearly hoping to witness more drama. Andre turned to his friends. Jackson, Tiana, this is Elizabeth, he said, as if introducing someone he'd invited intentionally. Tiana nodded stiffly while Jackson merely crossed his arms, making no attempt to hide his disapproval. Elizabeth stood awkwardly on the deck, clutching her handbag like a shield. I should probably just go, she said, already half turning back toward the dock. Please sit down, Andre said, gesturing to one of the empty deck chairs. We were just having some lemonade and sandwiches. Would you care to join us? Elizabeth looked at the offered chair as if it might bite her. I don't understand why you're being nice to me, she said bluntly. If I were you, I'd be furious. Andre's expression softened slightly. Who says I'm not? He replied, but I've found that anger rarely solves anything. Please sit. With visible reluctance, Elizabeth lowered herself into the chair, perching on the edge as if prepared to flee at any moment. Andre handed her a glass of lemonade, which she accepted without drinking. Why don't we start over? Andre suggested. I'm Andre Taylor. This is my friend Jackson, who I've known since college, and Tiana, who works with me at Taylor Security Solutions. Elizabeth Winthrop, she replied automatically, social conditioning temporarily overriding her discomfort. Jackson made a sound that might have been a scoff. Are we really doing this? Pretending everything's fine after what just happened? Elizabeth flinched, staring down at her untouched lemonade. Andre gave his friend a look. Jackson, no, he's right, Elizabeth interrupted. This is bizarre. I just accused you of trespassing on your own boat. You should be calling the marina management to have my membership revoked, not offering me drinks. Tiana, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke up. I'm curious about that myself, Andre. What's your angle here? Andre leaned back in his chair, considering his response. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deck as a gentle breeze ruffled the flags on the yacht's stern. When I was 16, he began, I saved up for months to buy my first car. Nothing fancy, just an old Honda that barely ran, but I was so proud of it. He paused, looking out over the water. One day I was checking the oil in a parking lot when a man came up and accused me of trying to steal the car. Called the police on me. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably in her chair. When the officers showed up, I was handcuffed and put in the back of a police car while they ran the registration. Even after they confirmed it was my car, the man who called never apologized. He just walked away. Andre turned his gaze back to Elizabeth. That was 26 years ago, and I still remember how helpless I felt. How angry. Jackson's expression softened slightly. He'd heard this story before, so what happened? Elizabeth asked quietly, finally taking a small sip of her lemonade. Nothing dramatic, Andre replied. The officers let me go. I drove home. Life went on. But I promised myself that if I ever found myself on the other side of that situation, I'd handle it differently. Tiana nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Elizabeth set her glass down on the small table beside her chair. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I made assumptions about you based on, well, you know what I based them on. She glanced at Jackson and Tiana, then back to Andre. I was wrong and I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that, Andre replied. But I'm curious, what made you so certain I couldn't own this yacht? Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. That's not a fair question. Maybe not, Andre acknowledged. But it's an important one. A tense silence fell over the group. In the distance, a boat horn sounded and seagulls circled overhead, their cries providing a soundtrack to the uncomfortable moment. Finally, Elizabeth sighed. I've been coming to this marina for 15 years. Until recently, I don't think I ever saw a black person who wasn't working here. It's just not what I'm used to. Jackson raised an eyebrow. And that justifies what happened today? No, Elizabeth said quickly. It doesn't. I'm just trying to be honest about why I reacted the way I did. Andre nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate the honesty. Change is difficult, especially when it challenges our worldview. Elizabeth looked at him with genuine curiosity now. You built a security software company? From the ground up, Andre confirmed. Started in my garage 12 years ago, now we have offices in 3 countries. That's impressive, Elizabeth said. And to her credit, she sounded sincere. Tiana, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, leaned forward. You know what the funny thing is? Andre is probably the most qualified person in this entire marina to own a yacht. How so? Elizabeth asked. Before he became a tech entrepreneur, he was a navigation specialist in the Navy, Tiana explained. He can sail circles around most of these weekend captains. Elizabeth looked at Andre with new eyes. I had no idea. There's a lot you don't know about me, Andre said simply. Just as there's a lot I don't know about you. That's kind of the point. The atmosphere on the deck had shifted subtly. The initial tension was still there, but it had been joined by something else. A cautious openness, a willingness to listen. A young man approached the yacht, tentatively calling out from the dock. Excuse me, Mr. Taylor? Andre turned to see one of the marina's newer members, a guy in his 20s who had recently purchased a modest sailboat. Hey, Chris, what can I do for you? Chris glanced nervously at the group before continuing. I just wanted to say, well, a bunch of us saw what happened earlier and we wanted you to know that most of us don't think like that. He nodded awkwardly toward Elizabeth, who looked down at her hands. This marina is better because you're part of it. Several other boat owners had gathered behind Chris, nodding in agreement. One woman called out, We've got your back, Andre. Andre smiled, genuinely touched by the show of support. Thank you. That means a lot. As the group on the dock dispersed, Elizabeth stood up, smoothing her tennis outfit with shaking hands. I should go. I've taken up enough of your time. Before you do, Andre said, rising from his chair. I'm hosting a charity event next weekend for the youth sailing program. It's right here at the marina. You should come. Elizabeth looked stunned. You're inviting me to your event? After today? Especially after today, Andre replied. It's a good opportunity to meet more of your fellow marina members. Broaden your perspective a bit. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll think about it. As Elizabeth prepared to leave, Tiana handed her a business card. Andre's too polite to say it, but I'm not. If you want to come to that event, you need to do some reflection first. This card has information about a workshop on implicit bias that I help run. It might be worth your time. To everyone's surprise, Elizabeth took the card and tucked it into her handbag. I'll look into it, she said quietly. Jackson, who had remained skeptical throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Winthrop. Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging the challenge in his statement. They do indeed. She turned to Andre. Thank you for the lemonade, Mr. Taylor, and for the conversation. I'm truly sorry about what happened. With that, she stepped carefully back onto the dock and walked away, her shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying a new weight. When she was out of earshot, Jackson turned to Andre. You know that clip of her accusing you is probably all over social media by now, right? Andre nodded, watching Elizabeth's retreating figure. Probably. And you're okay with that? Tiana asked. Andre picked up his lemonade glass, considering the question. No one's story should be defined by their worst moment, he said finally. She made a mistake. A big one. But what matters is what she does next. The marina buzzed with whispers and sidelong glances as Andre made his way down the dock 3 days later. The video of Elizabeth confronting him had indeed gone viral, just as Jackson had predicted. Local news stations had picked up the story, and Andre had received dozens of calls from reporters seeking interviews. He had declined them all. Mr. Taylor called the marina manager, jogging to catch up with him. Philip was a weathered man in his 60s, who had managed Harbor Point for over 2 decades. "Got a minute?" Andre paused, adjusting his sunglasses against the bright morning light.
"Morning, Philip. What can I do for you?"
Philip glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "About that incident the other day. The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss Elizabeth Winthrop's membership status. They'd like you to attend." Andre frowned. "They're considering revoking her membership? After what happened? With that video everywhere?" Philip raised his eyebrows. "Some of the board members are pretty adamant about it. They're saying it reflects poorly on the marina." Andre watched a pair of seagulls squabble over a discarded sandwich crust. "What time is the meeting?" 3 o'clock in the clubhouse conference room. Andre nodded. "I'll be there." As Philip walked away, Andre's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text from Tiana. "Have you seen this?" "It's getting worse." She had attached a link to a news article. The headline read, "Marina confrontation goes viral. Woman dubbed Yacht Karen faces backlash." Below it was a still image from the video, showing Elizabeth pointing accusingly at Andre. He sighed and pocketed his phone without reading the article. This wasn't how he had wanted things to play out. Andre continued to his yacht, where he had planned to spend a few hours catching up on work emails before heading to the office. As he approached the Sea Freedom, he noticed a small package sitting on the dock beside his slip. A plain white envelope was taped to the top. Cautiously, he picked it up. The package was lightweight, wrapped in simple brown paper. He opened the envelope first and found a handwritten note inside. "Mr. Taylor," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't bother you with excuses. What I did was wrong, plain and simple. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about our conversation and reading the materials Tiana suggested. I've also spent them watching my face plastered across social media and news sites, labeled as a racist. It's been eye-opening, to say the least. Inside this package is something my grandfather gave me years ago. He loved sailing more than anything. When I watch you with your boat, I see the same passion he had. He taught me that the sea doesn't care about who you are, only about whether you respect its power. I've already submitted my resignation to the Marina Board. It's better for everyone if I go. Elizabeth Winthrop." Andre set down the note and unwrapped the package. Inside was an antique brass compass, beautifully preserved with intricate engravings around its edge. A small inscription on the back read, "May you always find your way home." He stood there for a long moment, holding the compass and rereading the note. Then he checked his watch. It was just past 9, 6 hours until the board meeting. Making a decision, Andre pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Tiana, it's me. I need a favor." The Harbor Point Marina boardroom was packed with people despite the meeting being technically closed to the public. Board members sat around a large oak table, while additional chairs had been brought in for other attendees, including Philip, Dave the security officer, and several longtime Marina members. Elizabeth sat alone near the door, her eyes downcast, looking nothing like the confrontational woman from the viral video. Her usually perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. Andre entered a few minutes before 3, nodding to familiar faces as he made his way to an empty seat. The board president, a retired judge named Richard Kent, called the meeting to order. "We're here today to discuss the incident that occurred on Saturday involving Mrs. Elizabeth Winthrop and Mr. Andre Taylor," Richard began, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone accustomed to presiding over serious matters. "As you all know, a video of this incident has circulated widely, bringing unwanted attention to our marina." Several board members nodded grimly. "Mrs. Winthrop has submitted her resignation from the marina," Richard continued. "But before we accept it, I think we should hear from the parties involved." He turned to Elizabeth. "Mrs. Winthrop, would you like to speak first?" Elizabeth stood, her hands trembling slightly as she faced the room. "I've already written my resignation letter and I stand by that decision," she said. "What I did was inexcusable. I made assumptions about Mr. Taylor based solely on his appearance, and I behaved in a way that embarrassed both myself and this community." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I won't waste your time with explanations or excuses. I was wrong, period." As she sat back down, the room remained silent. Richard turned to Andre. "Mr. Taylor, would you care to address the board?" Andre stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the board taking this matter seriously, but I have to say, I'm not comfortable with the direction this seems to be heading." A murmur ran through the room. "The incident on Saturday was unfortunate," Andre continued. "Mrs. Winthrop made assumptions about me that were hurtful and, yes, rooted in racial bias. But I don't believe forcing her out of this community is the answer." Elizabeth looked up, surprise evident on her face. The easy thing would be to cut ties, to make an example of Mrs. Winthrop and declare the problem solved. But that doesn't actually solve anything. Andre looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member. The harder path, and the one I believe is worth taking, is to use this as an opportunity for growth. For all of us. One of the board members, a woman in her 50s named Victoria, spoke up. "Andre, with all due respect, the video has over 2 million views. People are calling for boycotts of the marina. We have to take decisive action." Andre nodded. "I understand that. But I've been thinking about this a lot over the past few days. What happened to me on Saturday? It wasn't new. It wasn't unique. Black people, people of color, we face these kinds of assumptions every day. The only difference this time was that it was caught on camera." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass compass Elizabeth had given him. "Mrs. Winthrop gave me this today, along with a note taking full responsibility for her actions. She's already facing significant public consequences for what she did. I'm not sure what pushing her out of the community accomplishes except to make us feel like we've done something." Richard leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting, Andre?" "I'm suggesting we take a different approach. Instead of accepting Mrs. Winthrop's resignation, I propose we use this incident to create something positive." Andre turned to address the whole room now. "Tiana Morgan, my colleague, runs workshops on recognizing and addressing implicit bias. I'd like to work with the board to establish a series of these workshops for Marina members." He gestured toward Elizabeth. "And I'd like Mrs. Winthrop to help organize them, to share her perspective and what she's learned from this experience. It would be a more meaningful response than simply cutting her out." The room erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. Elizabeth stared at Andre, her expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been gratitude. Richard called for order. "This is an unusual proposal, Andre. Mrs. Winthrop seriously violated our community standards." "She did," Andre agreed. "And she should face consequences. But I think there's more value in rehabilitation than punishment here." Victoria spoke again. "What about the public relations aspect? We're already dealing with significant backlash." Andre smiled slightly. "I'm willing to make a public statement supporting this approach. I think people will respect an attempt to create meaningful change more than they would a simple dismissal." The board members exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Elizabeth stood up again. "May I speak?" When Richard nodded, she continued, her voice stronger now. "Mr. Taylor's generosity is unexpected and undeserved. But if he's willing to give me this chance, I promise I won't waste it. I've spent the last 3 days educating myself, really looking at my own biases. I have a lot more work to do, but I'm committed to doing it. And if sharing my experience can help others avoid making the same mistakes, I'm all in." Dave, the security officer who had been present during the original confrontation, raised his hand. "For what it's worth, I've known Elizabeth for years. What she did was wrong, no question. But it's not the whole of who she is. I think Mr. Taylor's approach has merit." Richard looked around the room, gauging the response. "This would be highly unusual. Sometimes unusual situations call for unusual solutions," Andre replied. "I'm not asking anyone to forget what happened. I'm just suggesting that there might be a better way forward than simply cutting ties." After a moment, Richard nodded slowly. "I'd like to call for a vote of the board. All those in favor of accepting Mr. Taylor's proposal instead of Mrs. Winthrop's resignation?" Hands rose around the table, some immediately, others more hesitantly. In the end, the vote was 7-2 in favor. "The motion carries," Richard announced. "Mrs. Winthrop, your resignation is declined. Instead, you'll work with Mr. Taylor and Ms. Morgan to establish these workshops, with a report back to the board in 30 days. As the meeting adjourned, People filed out of the room, many of them stopping to speak briefly with Andre or Elizabeth. Eventually, only the two of them remained. Elizabeth approached Andre cautiously. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this for me? After what I did?" Andre looked down at the compass in his hand, then back at Elizabeth. "This isn't just about you or even about me. It's about trying a different approach to a problem that's bigger than both of us." He placed the compass back in her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Keep this. Let it remind you of the course you're setting now." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve a second chance." "Maybe not," Andre agreed. "But you're getting one anyway. The question is, what will you do with it?" Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set over the marina, casting long shadows across the docks where boats gently rocked in their slips. Among them, the Sea Freedom waited, a symbol of one man's success and now perhaps of something more. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Harbor Point Marina looked much the same as it always had. Boats gently bobbed in their slips. Seagulls circled overhead looking for scraps, and weekend sailors prepared their vessels for days out on the water. But beneath the surface, things were changing. The community center attached to the marina office had been transformed. What had once been a rarely used space for occasional meetings now buzzed with activity as 30 marina members gathered around tables arranged in a large circle. At the front of the room, Tiana stood beside a projection screen, her professional demeanor perfectly suited to her role as facilitator. "Thank you all for coming today," she said, surveying the surprisingly good turnout. "For those who don't know me, I'm Tiana Morgan. In addition to working with Andre at Taylor Security Solutions, I volunteer with several organizations focused on community building and education." Andre sat near the back of the room, deliberately keeping a low profile. He nodded encouragingly when Tiana glanced his way. "Before we begin the workshop," Tiana continued, "I want to thank someone who was instrumental in putting this together." She gestured toward Elizabeth, who sat stiffly in a chair near the front. "Elizabeth has worked tirelessly over the past 2 weeks to organize these sessions, reach out to marina members, and create a space where we can have honest conversations." Elizabeth nodded slightly in acknowledgement, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and determination. She wore a simple blouse and slacks instead of her usual designer outfits, as if deliberately downplaying her usual status markers. "Now," Tiana said, "I know some of you are here because you're genuinely interested in this topic. Others might be here out of curiosity about the incident that prompted these workshops. And that's okay. We're not here to point fingers or make anyone feel guilty. We're here to learn and grow together." She clicked to the first slide, which simply read, "Implicit bias, what it is and why it matters." "Let's start with an exercise," Tiana suggested. "I'd like everyone to take a minute and write down 3 assumptions you've made about someone recently that turned out to be wrong." As the participants began writing, Andre watched the room. There was Richard, the board president, his brow furrowed in concentration. Dave, the security officer, sat nearby, already scribbling on his notepad. Philip, the marina manager, hesitated before reluctantly putting pen to paper. Several yacht owners Andre recognized but didn't know well were scattered throughout the space, some looking engaged, others clearly uncomfortable. After giving everyone time to write, Tiana asked for volunteers to share. At first, no one raised their hand. Then, surprising everyone, Elizabeth stood up. "I'll go first," she said, her voice steadier than it had been at the board meeting. "Obviously, my most recent incorrect assumption is well documented." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. "But looking back, I realize I've been making assumptions like that for years. I assumed the new receptionist at my doctor's office couldn't be competent because of her accent. I assumed a young man in a hoodie was dangerous when he was just a college student waiting for the bus. I assumed my gardener didn't speak English well, even though he has a master's degree in botany." She sat down, and after a moment of silence, others began to share their own stories. The ice broken, the workshop proceeded with increasing participation. Andre slipped out quietly about halfway through. He had meetings to attend and didn't want to make anyone self-conscious with his presence. As he walked down the dock toward the parking lot, he heard footsteps behind him. "Running away?" Jackson asked, catching up. Andre smiled at his old friend. "Just giving them space. This isn't about me." Jackson fell into step beside him. "You're a better man than me. I'd still be angry. Who says I'm not angry? Andre replied. I just don't see how holding on to that anger helps anything. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Jackson spoke again. The video hit 5 million views yesterday. Andre winced. I wish people would let it go. The internet never forgets, Jackson said. But hey, at least the comments section is starting to change. People are noticing that you haven't joined the pile-on against her. Some are even sharing the story about the workshops. He might have turned this whole thing around. Andre shrugged. We'll see. Real change takes time. As they reached the parking lot, a news van pulled in, a reporter and cameraman quickly emerging. Mr. Taylor, the reporter called, hurrying toward them with microphone extended. Kelly Chen from Channel 7 News. Could we get a statement about the Yacht Karen incident and what's happening at the marina today? Andre suppressed a sigh. He'd been dodging reporters for weeks, but maybe it was time to address the situation directly. I'd be happy to make a brief statement, he said, but I'd appreciate it if you'd stop using that nickname. Her name is Elizabeth Winthrop. The reporter looked surprised but nodded. The cameraman signaled that he was recording. 2 weeks ago, an unfortunate incident occurred here at Harbor Point Marina, Andre began, choosing his words carefully. A video of that incident went viral, and many people have strong opinions about what happened. What viewers of that clip didn't see was what came after. A difficult conversation, sincere remorse, and a community's decision to turn a negative moment into an opportunity for growth. He gestured toward the community center. Right now, Marina members are participating in the first of several workshops designed to help us all recognize and address our implicit biases. These sessions weren't my idea alone. They're a collaborative effort, and Ms. Winthrop has been instrumental in organizing them. The reporter looked skeptical. So you've forgiven her? Andre considered the question. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. What I can say is that I respect her willingness to take responsibility and work toward change both in herself and in this community. That's more meaningful than public shaming or punishment. Some people are calling you a saint for your response, the reporter pressed. Others say you're letting racism slide by not pushing for harsher consequences. Jackson made a noise of disgust at this characterization, but Andre placed a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. I'm no saint, Andre replied with a slight smile, and I'm not letting anything slide. I simply believe in giving people the chance to learn and do better. Ms. Winthrop made a mistake, a serious one, but that mistake doesn't define her any more than being on the receiving end of it defines me. After a few more questions, the reporter thanked him and moved toward the community center, likely hoping to get additional perspectives. That'll be all over the evening news, Jackson remarked as they continued to the parking lot. Probably, Andre agreed. Hopefully it helps change the narrative a bit. 3 days later, Andre was working on his yacht, performing routine maintenance on the navigation system. The Sea Freedom was his sanctuary, a place where he could think clearly and work with his hands. The gentle motion of the boat and the sounds of the water lapping against the hull had a calming effect that even his luxurious home couldn't match. He heard footsteps on the dock and looked up to see Elizabeth approaching, carrying a folder. She'd taken to wearing her marina badge prominently, as if determined to never again be questioned about her right to be there. Is this a bad time? She called. Andre wiped his hands on a towel. Not at all. Come aboard. Elizabeth stepped carefully onto the yacht, still somewhat hesitant despite having been invited. I wanted to give you an update on the workshops, she said, offering him the folder. We've had 47 people sign up for the next session, including members from 3 neighboring marinas. Andre raised his eyebrows, genuinely impressed. That's fantastic. Your interview helped, Elizabeth admitted. It's been viewed almost as many times as the original video now. Andre opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Attendance records, feedback forms, plans for future sessions. You've been busy, Elizabeth nodded. It's the least I could do. She hesitated, then added, There's something else. I received a call from the National Boating Association yesterday. They want to turn what we're doing here into a pilot program for marinas across the country. Andre looked up from the folder, surprised. Really? They said they've never seen a community respond to an incident like this in such a productive way. Elizabeth's voice held a note of pride that hadn't been there before. They want you to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference in October. Andre laughed softly. That wasn't exactly what I had in mind when all this started. Will you do it? He considered for a moment. I will if you'll co-present with me. This has been as much your project as mine. Elizabeth blinked in surprise. You'd want me on stage with you? After everything? Especially after everything, Andre replied. That's the whole point. This isn't just about what happened that day. It's about what happened afterward. Elizabeth nodded slowly. I'll do it. She looked around the yacht, taking in the gleaming equipment and polished woodwork. You know, I don't think I ever properly apologized to your friends, Jackson and Tiana. They were there that day too. They'll be at the charity event this weekend, Andre said. You're still coming, right? I'll be there. Elizabeth glanced at her watch. I should go. I'm meeting with the developer who's building the workshop website. As she turned to leave, Andre called after her. Elizabeth? She paused, looking back. The compass you gave me, he said. It belonged to your grandfather? Elizabeth nodded. He was a merchant marine, sailed all over the world. He taught me that the ocean doesn't care about your race, your gender, your wealth, or your status. It only respects skill, preparation, and respect for its power. A small smile touched her lips. I think I forgot that lesson for a while. Andre nodded, understanding the weight of her words. See you this weekend. As Elizabeth walked back down the dock, her steps more confident than they had been when she arrived, Andre turned his attention back to the navigation system. But his mind was elsewhere, contemplating the unexpected journey that had begun with a confrontation and was now expanding in ways none of them could have predicted. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important voyages were the ones you never planned to take. 6 months had passed since that fateful day on the dock. The summer heat had given way to fall, and fall had surrendered to the crisp chill of early winter. Harbor Point. Marina looked different in the off-season, fewer boats, quieter docks, and a stillness that contrasted with the bustling activity of summer. Andre stood at the podium in the marina's newly renovated community center, now officially named the Harbor Point Inclusion Center. The space had been transformed with fresh paint, new furniture, and a state-of-the-art projection system, all funded by donations that had poured in after the story of the marina's response to the viral incident had spread. 1 year ago, Andre began, addressing the crowd that filled every seat in the room. I couldn't have imagined standing here today. What began as an ugly confrontation has evolved into something none of us expected. The audience included marina members, representatives from boating associations across the country, local officials, and even a film crew from a documentary series about community transformation. In the front row sat Tiana and Jackson, both beaming with pride. Beside them was Elizabeth, looking more relaxed and confident than she had 6 months earlier. When I first purchased the Sea Freedom, Andre continued, I saw it as a personal achievement, a symbol of how far I'd come. What I didn't realize was that it would also become a catalyst for change that would extend far beyond me. He clicked to the next slide, which displayed statistics about the workshop program that had begun with that first session 6 months ago. To date, our implicit bias awareness program has been implemented in 47 marinas across 12 states. Over 3,000 people have participated, and 92% report that the experience changed their perspective in meaningful ways. Andre gestured toward Elizabeth. None of this would have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of Elizabeth Winthrop, who took a moment of personal failure and transformed it into a mission for positive change. Applause filled the room as Elizabeth nodded in acknowledgement, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I'd like to invite Elizabeth to join me now to share the news about the next phase of our initiative, Andre said. Stepping aside, Elizabeth walked to the podium, the compass that had once belonged to her grandfather now hanging from a chain around her neck, a permanent reminder of the journey she had undertaken. Thank you, Andre, she said, her voice steady and clear. When I confronted Andre that day, I was operating from a place of ignorance and deep-seated bias that I hadn't even acknowledged to myself. The easy path would have been for him to vilify me, and for me to retreat in shame. Instead, we chose a harder road, one of accountability, education, and ultimately, transformation. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed the logo for a new non-profit organization, Open Waters Initiative. Today, we're proud to announce the official launch of Open Waters, a national organization dedicated to breaking down barriers in recreational boating and water sports. With seed funding from Taylor Security Solutions and support from the National Boating Association, we'll be expanding our workshops, creating scholarship programs for underrepresented youth to learn sailing and maritime skills, and working with marinas nationwide to create more inclusive environments. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. As Elizabeth returned to her seat, a local official took the podium to present Andre and Elizabeth with a Community Leadership Award. The ceremony continued with various speakers sharing their experiences with the program. Afterward, as people mingled during the reception, Andre found himself standing near the large windows overlooking the marina. The Sea Freedom was visible in its slip, decorated with small white lights for the holiday season. "Penny for your thoughts?" came Tiana's voice as she joined him, handing him a glass of sparkling cider. Andre smiled, just thinking about how differently this all could have gone. "You mean if you'd been a normal human being who got angry when someone racially profiled him?" Tiana asked with a raised eyebrow and a hint of a smile. "Most people would have responded very differently, you know." "Maybe," Andre acknowledged, "but then we wouldn't be here." Jackson appeared beside them, snagging a mini quiche from a passing server's tray. "The documentary people want to interview you again. Apparently they're expanding it from a single episode to a 3-part series." Andre groaned. "Haven't they got enough footage already? They've been following us around for months." "People are captivated by the story," Tiana pointed out. "It's not every day that an ugly incident transforms into something this positive. You two are breaking the usual script." "Speaking of you two," Jackson said, nodding across the room, "your partner in crime is looking for you." Elizabeth was indeed making her way toward them, weaving through groups of chatting guests. When she reached them, she looked uncharacteristically nervous. "Andre, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" she asked. "Of course," he replied, curious. Tiana gave him a meaningful look as she and Jackson moved away to give them privacy. Elizabeth led Andre to a quieter corner of the room. "I received a call from the New York Times this morning," she said. "They want to do a feature story on open waters, front page of the Sunday edition." "That's fantastic," Andre replied. "The exposure would be incredible for the organization." "There's more," Elizabeth continued. "They've also been offered an exclusive book deal. Our story, From Confrontation to Collaboration. The publisher is offering a significant advance, with all proceeds going directly to open waters." Andre's eyebrows rose. "A book?" "I told them I wouldn't consider it without discussing it with you first," Elizabeth said quickly. "This is your story as much as it's mine, more so, really. You have every right to say no." Andre was quiet for a moment, considering. "What would be the focus of the book?" "That's up to us," Elizabeth replied. "But I think it should be honest, the good, the bad, and the ugly. My biases, your response, the journey we've both been on since then, and the impact it's had. The publisher believes it could be a powerful tool for dialogue about race, redemption, and community." Andre looked out the window at his yacht, remembering that day 6 months ago when Elizabeth had stood on the dock, pointing accusingly at him. How far they had come since then. "If we do this," he said slowly, "I don't want it to be sensationalized. No Yacht Karen angle. No portraying me as some kind of saint or you as a villain who saw the light. Real change is messier than that." Elizabeth nodded emphatically. "I completely agree. That's exactly what I told them. This isn't about creating heroes and villains. It's about showing how complicated these situations are, and how we can do better as individuals and communities." Andre considered for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, let's do it. But we have approval over the final manuscript and we co-write it." "No ghostwriters shaping our story?" Elizabeth looked relieved. "Thank you. I think this could be really important." As they rejoined the party, Andre noticed a group of teenagers huddled near the refreshment table. They were participants in the youth sailing program that had expanded significantly in recent months, with several new scholarships funded by Open Waters. Among them was a young black girl who had shown exceptional talent on the water. Andre had taken her out on the Sea Freedom several times, teaching her navigation skills and watching her